Some friendships defy all odds. Some bonds are written in the stars. This, this is the story of how I found my best friend, a gorilla. I still remember the first time I saw him. He was just a baby, small and trembling, his tiny body half hidden behind a fallen tree. His eyes, wide and searching, held a sadness I couldn't understand back then. They were deep, amber-colored, reflecting fear, uncertainty, and something else. Hope. He didn't move at first, just watched me from a distance, his little fingers clinging to the damp bark as though it was the only thing keeping him safe. I took a slow step forward, careful not to startle him. My heart pounded as I reached into the small basket I carried and pulled out a ripe banana. I knelt down and placed it on the ground between us, then sat back, my breath shallow, waiting. He didn't come closer, not that day, not the next, but I kept returning, sitting in the same spot every morning, always leaving something for him: bananas, mangoes, small pieces of sugarcane. I spoke to him softly, whispering words I knew he wouldn't understand, but somehow I hoped he would feel. I told him it was okay, that he wasn't alone, that I wasn't going to hurt him, and then, after days of nothing but silence and stolen glances, something changed. He moved, just an inch at first, his little nostrils flaring as he took in my scent. His fingers twitched, his dark fur shifting with the motion. Then, hesitantly, cautiously, he crept forward. My heart felt like it might burst as he reached out with a tiny hand, his fingers brushing against the banana before quickly snatching it up and retreating. He turned it over in his hands, sniffing it, inspecting it. Then, finally, he took a small bite. And in that moment, I knew. This was the beginning of something extraordinary. The jungle was my home. My father always said we didn't just live near it, we were a part of it. Our house sat at the edge of the wildlife sanctuary, where the trees whispered secrets in the wind and the sounds of distant creatures filled the night air. I grew up surrounded by the rhythms of nature, knowing the calls of birds before I could read, recognizing the rustling of leaves as a sign of something unseen moving through the undergrowth. But nothing prepared me for the day my father brought home a tiny, frightened gorilla. His name was Kuba, or at least that's what we called him. He had no mother, no family, no troop to protect him. Poachers had taken that from him. My father, a primatologist, had rescued him from a tragic fate, but saving his life was only the beginning. He was weak, malnourished, and terrified of the world around him. He huddled in the corner of the small rehabilitation enclosure my father had set up. His tiny body curled tightly, his eyes filled with something I had never seen before: absolute fear. He had every reason to be afraid. Humans had taken everything from him. I watched him from a distance at first, careful not to get too close. My father told me that trust was something that had to be earned, not given. So I waited. I spent hours outside his enclosure, sitting cross-legged in the dirt, just existing in his space. I watched the way his small fingers traced patterns on the ground, the way his ears twitched at unfamiliar sounds, the way his chest rose and fell with each wary breath. I whispered to him, soft words that meant nothing and everything all at once. "It's okay. You're safe now. I promise." I didn't know if he understood, but I hoped he did. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, Kuba's fear began to fade. He started to watch me the way I watched him, curious but hesitant, as if he was trying to decide if I was a friend or just another threat. The first time he took a step toward me, my breath caught in my throat. He didn't come close, not yet. But it was enough, a sign that maybe, just maybe, he was starting to trust me. And then one day, something incredible happened. I was sitting outside his enclosure, humming a song my mother used to sing, when I felt something touch my foot. I looked down, and there he was, his small, delicate fingers resting against my shoe. My heart pounded as I fought the urge to move, to reach for him, to do anything that might break the fragile moment. He looked up at me with those deep amber eyes, and for the first time, I saw something new in them. Not just fear, not just sadness, but something I never expected. Hope. Kuba was still wary, but something had shifted. He no longer flinched when I moved, no longer shrank into the shadows when I sat near him. Instead, he watched me, his eyes filled with cautious curiosity. Every morning, I returned to his enclosure, sitting just outside the wooden fence, letting him decide how close he wanted to be. I brought fruit, carefully placing it within reach, and waited. At first, he only took what I left behind after I was gone. But little by little, he began to inch closer while I was still there. It was a slow process, a delicate dance of patience and trust, but I didn't mind. Every small step he took toward me felt like a victory. One morning, I sat with my legs crossed, peeling a banana in slow, deliberate motions, letting him watch. His head tilted, his nostrils flaring as he took in the scent. I broke off a piece and held it out, my hand resting on the ground, open, offering, but not forcing. He hesitated, his small fingers twitching at his sides. Then, with a deep breath, he reached forward. His tiny hand brushed against mine as he took the banana, and for the first time, he didn't pull away immediately. He sat there, right in front of me, chewing slowly, his gaze locked onto mine. My heart swelled. It wasn't just about the food. It was about trust. As the days passed, Kuba became bolder. He started to play, rolling in the dirt, tossing leaves in the air, his baby-like laughter filling the space between us. He tested boundaries, tugging at my shoelaces, reaching for my hair, tapping my arm to see how I would react. I laughed, playing along, mimicking his movements, letting him know that I was his friend. When I scratched the ground with my fingers, he did the same. When I patted my chest, he copied me, his little hands thumping against his fur. We were learning each other's language, a silent conversation built on trust and understanding. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been sitting outside his enclosure as usual when Kuba did something I never expected. He stood up, walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps, and without hesitation, climbed into my lap. My breath caught as he curled against me, his tiny fingers gripping my arm, his head resting against my chest. I froze, afraid that any movement might scare him away, but he didn't move. He just stayed there, his body warm against mine, his breathing steady. At that moment, I knew this wasn't just trust. This was something deeper, something unbreakable. Kuba wasn't just a rescued gorilla anymore. He was my friend, my family, my heart. Kuba and I became inseparable. Every morning, as soon as I stepped outside, I could hear his excited grunts from his enclosure. He would rush toward me, his small hands gripping the wooden fence, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw me. The once fearful little gorilla had transformed into a playful, mischievous ball of energy. He would chase butterflies, tumble through the grass, and tug at my hair whenever I wasn't paying attention. Sometimes, he would wrap his arms around my neck, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. And I didn't mind, because every time he held me like that, it felt like he was telling me, in his own way, I trust you, I love you. We created our own little world, one where words weren't needed, where love and understanding spoke louder than anything else. I learned his signals, when he was happy, when he wanted to play, when he was feeling shy, and he learned mine. If I sat down cross-legged, he knew I was waiting for him to come closer. If I patted my chest twice, he knew I was inviting him for a hug. It was our secret language, something no one else could understand. One day, I brought him a small stuffed toy, a soft brown monkey with long arms. I didn't know if he would like it, but the moment I placed it in front of him, he grabbed it with both hands, tilting his head as he studied it. Then, to my surprise, he held it against his chest and rocked back and forth, the way I had seen mother gorillas do with their babies. My heart ached. He was remembering something I could never replace. I reached out, placing a gentle hand on his back. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into my touch, pressing his small body against my side. I closed my eyes, whispering softly, "I'm here, Kuba. You're not alone." But as much as I wanted our world to stay the same forever, I knew deep down that it couldn't. Kuba wasn't meant to live in an enclosure. He wasn't meant to stay by my side like a pet. He was a wild animal, a creature of the jungle, meant to run free with his own kind. I ignored that thought for as long as I could, pushing it away every time it crept into my mind. But I knew the day would come when someone else would make the decision for me. I should have known it wouldn't last forever. Deep down, I think I did. But knowing something and accepting it are two very different things. Kuba was growing fast. The tiny, frightened baby I had met was now strong, his limbs filling out, his instincts sharpening. He wasn't just a rescued gorilla anymore. He was becoming what he was always meant to be, wild. And the more he changed, the more people began to notice. One evening, I overheard my father talking in hushed tones with another researcher. They were discussing Kuba's future, his need to be introduced to a troop, to be prepared for release. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe he could stay here forever, that our bond was enough, but the truth was unavoidable. This wasn't my choice to make. Kuba didn't belong to me. He belonged to the jungle. I sat outside his enclosure that night, watching him as he played with the stuffed monkey I had given him. He wasn't a baby anymore, but in that moment, curled up with his little toy, he still looked like the fragile creature I had first met. I swallowed the lump in my throat and whispered, "Do you ever think about them? Your real family?" He didn't understand my words, but he looked up at me, his dark eyes filled with something so deep, so knowing, it almost broke me. I reached out, and he met my hand halfway, pressing his palm to mine. It was the same way we had first connected all those months ago, and suddenly, I knew. He would be okay. No matter what happened next, he would be okay. The next morning, my father told me the decision had been made. Kuba would be moved to a protected reserve, where he would be slowly introduced to other gorillas, prepared for the life he was meant to have. My hands clenched into fists, my heart screaming in protest, but I nodded. I didn't argue, because this wasn't about me. It never was. This was about Kuba, about giving him the chance to be free. I spent every moment I could with him after that. We played, we laughed, we sat together in silence. I memorized every little thing about him, his expressions, his sounds, the way his fingers curled when he slept. And then the day came. The truck arrived, and men in uniform stepped out, speaking in calm but firm voices. I stood by as they opened the enclosure, my body tense, my heart pounding. Kuba didn't resist. He trusted me too much to be afraid. When they led him toward the truck, he looked back at me, his eyes filled with confusion. And that was when I broke. I ran to him, throwing my arms around his thick, growing body. "I love you," I whispered against his fur, my voice shaking. "You're going to be okay. I promise." His arms tightened around me in return, his grip familiar, safe, heartbreaking. And then, just like that, they led him away. I stood frozen as the truck disappeared down the dirt road, my hands empty, my heart aching. The jungle felt quieter that day, emptier, like a part of me had been taken with him. The days after Kuba left felt hollow. The mornings were the hardest. I would still wake up expecting to hear his playful grunts outside, still find myself reaching for the basket of fruit I used to bring him. But the enclosure was empty now. The space where he used to sit, where we used to share quiet moments, was just a patch of dirt and scattered leaves. I told myself this was right, that this was what he needed, But that didn't make it hurt any less. I asked my father about him constantly. Had he arrived safely? Was he eating? Was he scared? My father assured me that Kuba was adjusting, that the caretakers were doing everything they could to help him transition. But I knew what he wasn't saying. It wasn't easy. How could it be? He had spent so much of his life with me, in a world that wasn't truly his. And now he was alone again, surrounded by others of his kind, but without the one thing he had always known, me. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, I learned to live with the silence. I threw myself into my father's work, helping where I could, learning more about the animals he dedicated his life to protecting. I told myself that if I couldn't be with Kuba, at least I could make sure others like him never had to suffer the way he did. But no matter how much time passed, a part of me always wondered, did he still think of me? Did he still remember? And then, one day, I got my answer. My father had been visiting the reserve, checking on the rehabilitation program, when he came home with something in his hands. A photograph. My breath caught as I looked at it. There he was. Kuba. Stronger, bigger, no longer the scared little baby I had once known. He was sitting beneath a tree, surrounded by other young gorillas, his body relaxed, his eyes calm, and in his arms, tucked against his chest, was something familiar. The stuffed monkey I had given him. Tears blurred my vision as I traced my fingers over the image. He had kept it. Through everything, through all the changes, he had held on to that small piece of our world. He hadn't forgotten me, and in that moment, I knew I had never lost him. Not really. Love doesn't fade just because distance grows between us. Love, the kind that truly matters, knows no bounds. Time moved on, as it always does. Seasons changed, the jungle thrived, and life carried me forward. But no matter how many days passed, a part of me always remained with Kuba. I found comfort in the thought that he was where he belonged, that he was learning to be what he was always meant to be, wild and free. But even with that knowledge, I never stopped hoping that one day, somehow, our paths would cross again. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, my father received a call. I saw the way his expression shifted, the way his eyes flickered toward me with something unspoken. My heart pounded. I didn't know why, but I felt it. Something was about to change. He hung up the phone and turned to me, his voice calm but weighted with meaning. "They've been watching Kuba closely," he said. "He's thriving. He's forming bonds with the troop. But there's something else." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Every day, he goes to the same spot near the edge of the reserve. He sits there for hours, just staring out into the trees, like he's waiting for something." My breath caught. I didn't have to ask. I knew. He was waiting for me. Without thinking, without hesitation, I grabbed my jacket and ran. My father called after me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The sanctuary wasn't far, just a few hours' drive, but every second felt like an eternity. When we arrived, the rangers led me through the dense foliage, their footsteps careful, their voices hushed. And then, through the trees, I saw him. Kuba sat on a fallen log, his massive form outlined against the soft glow of the evening light. He was bigger now, stronger, his muscles defined, his presence commanding. But when he turned his head, when his amber eyes met mine, I saw him. My Kuba. My best friend. My heart pounded as I took a step forward, unsure if he would recognize me, unsure if time had changed what we once had. But then, in a single, breathtaking moment, he moved. With a deep, rumbling grunt, he rose to his feet and crossed the distance between us. The world around me blurred as he reached me, his massive arms wrapping around my shoulders, pulling me close in the only way he knew how. I choked back a sob as I buried my face in his fur, my fingers gripping him tightly, afraid that if I let go, the moment would slip away. He was here. He remembered. And just like that, the months, the distance, the silence, none of it mattered. Because love, real, unconditional love, never fades. I don't know how long we stood there, holding on to each other, but it didn't matter. In that moment, time didn't exist. It was just me and Kuba, just like it had always been. When he finally pulled away, he looked at me for a long time, his dark eyes filled with something I couldn't quite put into words. Then, with a final gentle nudge, he turned and walked back toward the trees, and I let him go. Because I knew, without a doubt, that no matter where life took us, no matter how much time passed, our bond would always remain. Because love, the kind that truly matters, knows no bounds. I stood there for a long time, watching Kuba disappear into the trees. The jungle embraced him like it had been waiting for him all along, the rustling leaves whispering secrets only he could understand. I should have been sad. I should have felt that familiar ache of loss creeping in. But this time I didn't, because this wasn't the end of our story. It never would be. As I walked back toward the reserve station, my father met me with a knowing smile. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He could see it in my face, in the way my shoulders weren't weighed down by grief anymore. I had found my closure. Or maybe I had realized that closure wasn't what I needed at all. Love like this, a bond like ours, didn't need an ending. It simply was, and that was enough. Life carried on, but in a different way now. I no longer woke up to silence that felt empty. Instead, I woke up knowing that somewhere, deep in the jungle, Kuba was living the life he was meant to live, running with his troop, climbing trees, learning the ways of the wild. And maybe, just maybe, on quiet afternoons, he would sit by that fallen log where we had reunited, looking out into the trees, remembering me the way I remembered him. And I kept going. I threw myself into my father's work, dedicating my time to protecting the creatures that shared our world. I spoke to people about Kuba's story, about the reality of poaching, about the importance of conservation. Because if his journey had taught me anything, it was that love doesn't just change the ones we give it to, it changes us too. And with that love comes responsibility. Responsibility to protect, to care, to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. I never saw Kuba again after that day. Not in the way I had hoped, at least, but sometimes, when I walked through the jungle, I would hear the rustling of leaves that felt just a little too familiar, or catch a glimpse of movement in the distance, a shadow among the trees. And I would smile, because I knew. He was out there, watching over me, just as I was watching over him. And no matter how far apart we were, no matter how much time passed, we would always be connected, because love, when it's real, when it's pure, knows no bounds. Kuba's story didn't just change my life, it shaped my purpose. What started as a bond between a girl and a lost gorilla became something bigger than I ever imagined. It became a reminder of the fragile connection between humans and the wild, of the responsibility we carry to protect those who cannot speak for themselves. Because for every Kuba out there are countless others, animals stolen from their homes, torn from their families, struggling to survive in a world that sees them as commodities rather than living, feeling beings. I realized then that love alone wasn't enough. Love had saved Kuba, yes, but love needed action to make a difference. So I dedicated myself to the fight. I joined my father's work with a new sense of purpose, traveling to reserves, speaking at conservation programs, sharing Kuba's story with anyone who would listen. Because if people could see what I saw, if they could feel what I felt, then maybe, just maybe, they would care enough to change things. Over the years, I met others who had their own Kubas, rescued animals with stories of survival, people who had dedicated their lives to giving them a second chance. And with every life we saved, every creature we returned to the wild, I felt Kuba's presence, as if he was still with me, guiding me, reminding me why I started this journey in the first place. Sometimes at night I would dream of him. I'd see him sitting beneath the stars, his eyes filled with that same deep understanding he always had. And when I woke up, I carried that feeling with me, like a silent promise between us, that I would keep fighting, that I would keep protecting, that I would never forget. Because love, true, unconditional love, doesn't just exist in the moments we share. It lives on in the choices we make, in the lives we touch, in the legacy we leave behind. And Kuba? He wasn't just a gorilla. He was proof that love, no matter how unlikely, no matter how impossible it may seem, truly knows no bounds.